Hey Dan, it's Art. I have you on speaker here. Hello?
Yeah, how are you?
Can you hear me okay?
Really?
How's that?
That's much better.
Okay, good. So I have you on speaker. We've got about a minute to go, and we have the entire commission convened, and along with Tom and Janine. So 30 seconds. Good to go. Okay, we'll call to order the May 13th Nantucket Memorial Airport Commission. Chairman Dare Drake is participating remotely due to geographical distance, so I will be the acting chair tonight. Because of the remote participation, all votes will be by roll call. We have you there okay, Dan?
No, thank you.
Okay, great. So with that, we'll start with the agenda as drafted. Are there any comments or suggested changes for the agenda? Hearing none, we'll move forward with the agenda as drafted. The next item is the April 22nd, 2014 minutes. Are there any comments, questions, or concerns regarding the April 22nd minutes?
No, I'll move approval.
I'll second.
So we'll go for a roll call. Mr. Planzer?
Aye.
Ms.
Aye.
Topham? Ms. Planzer?
Aye.
And Mr. Drake?
Aye.
So the April 22nd minutes are adopted as drafted. 5-6 minutes are still pending, correct? And then so we'll move to ratify the May 7th, 2014 warrant. Did anyone have any questions or concerns with the warrant? Hearing none, we'll accept the 5/17/14 warrant. Moving on, is there any public comment tonight? We don't have any members of the public besides for, Bobby and airport employees, just so you know, Dan.
Thank you.
With that, we'll move on to pending leases and contracts as set forth on Exhibit 1. I'll run through them, I think, one at a time. And if anyone has any questions or concerns, I think that because we have to do a roll call on this, we probably shouldn't be overly burdensome to do that for each of them individually. So I think that what we'll do is I'll go through the list first and ask if anybody has any comments or questions, and also give the manager an opportunity should he want to add any information. The first contract is with Kevin Conrad Heating and Cooling for $31,400 to repair a system coil and antifreeze in the ARF building. That is subject to a pending insurance claim. Are there any questions or concerns?
No.
The next contract is with Baines & Jones Electrical Supply for $4,154 for replacement parts for the south ramp light out of the operating budget. Are there any questions or concerns?
No.
Is that
Go right ahead, Dan.
the lamp by the right at the corner of the SBO building?
I believe it's two heads for that pole, yes. And then there's going to be another two installed later.
Could you hear that, Dan?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. The next contract is with Sherwin Industries for $24,660, and that's for the Type 3 glass beads required for the airfield painting out of the operating budget. Any questions or concerns? The next is with Schmidt Equipment for $70,000, and that's for the compact track loader skid steer. We're hoping we have an approval for a Mass DOT grant for an 80% reimbursement, should that be delivered before June 30th. Any questions or concerns? Or Tom?
We're getting indications that we will have the equipment here before June 30th.
Great.
For all the grants.
And so the next one is with Schmidt Equipment as well for $271.85 for the Deere loader. We did not get the Mass DOT grant on that. Any questions or concerns?
Yeah, okay, I had
Did they
the,
say why?
Tom?
No, we didn't get an explanation. We received, I believe, 3 grants, but we didn't get that one. I'll find out. I'll check back with Tom Mahoney and find out.
Mrs. Planzer?
okay, I had a question on the one, the MHQ supply. I guess that's the one for the pickup.
Okay, why don't we,
Next, yeah.
we'll do that one next. Let's just be sure. Are you okay with the Deere loader? And
Oh, right, I thought we'd, okay.
so
got
I
you.
guess the question is
Oh, I see the
if
difference. I understand.
there was 2 Schmidt Equipments. So
Yeah,
we're on
I
the
got it.
second.
Yeah.
Is that something that we want to hold for additional information, or Dan, is that you're looking for more information?
No, I think we know we need it. I'd just be interested if we can find out why they declined it.
I will look into that.
And do we have the
Thank you.
funds for it already in our budget or not, or were we expecting it to be reimbursed?
We budgeted for all of this at full cost,
Okay,
not assuming any state grants. So any of the state grants is just additional.
okay, thank you.
And just for clarification, that is listed as the source of funding out of the capital account.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't,
Nope, that's just fair. I know we have it listed in front of us. The next contract is with MHQ Supply for $63,000 for the F-350 pickup with a skid tank, and we have an 80% reimbursement approved by Mass DOT, and also out of the capital funding. And Mrs. Plansner had a question about that.
Yes, okay, it says if it's delivered before 6/30/14. And then the contract says the term of the agreement will commence on July 1st. So those seem to not be
It's
in
a funding issue. The
sync.
July 1st is because of the fiscal year, and that's when the borrowing and the funding will come out. The
Okay,
delivery must occur prior to it to get the state funding.
okay, so it's delivered.
It's delivered prior to, or like on June 30th.
Uh-huh,
Contract starts July 1, and that's when the money is due. We couldn't date the contract prior to,
because
The
it's
fiscal
a
year.
different
yes.
pot of money, in other words. Okay, I understand.
Dan, did you also have a question on that MHQ Supply contract?
No,
Okay. And then finally, Tom, on the World Fuel Services?
They're still pending on the fuel agreements. We received substantial comments back from our legal counsel, and they've been forwarded to Ascent, so we're waiting to hear back from Ascent. There was our legal counsel believed there was some duplication in the boilerplate as well as some of the general contracts, so we eliminated a lot of that.
So I would ask, go ahead, Dan.
Didn't we do all 3 of the fuel ones at once?
I didn't.
There's only a single World Fuel, and we're going to hold that one over.
There may be.
No, there are 3.
There's
Aren't
3
there
here.
3, Tom?
Well, in this one, the way this is read, there's 2 in this one. It says aviation fuel supply. There will be an aviation fuel supply agreement, a truck lease, and then potentially a branded Phillips 66. Then after that, there may be additional ones. So the top 2 priority ones are the truck lease and fuel supply.
But they haven't been finished yet, right?
No, that's why I say we received substantial comments from legal and forwarded them on to Ascent earlier.
So this should be held in abeyance till the next meeting.
Yes, in fact, we may be back for another extension for a 30-day if we can't get negotiation or, agreement on the terms.
So
Okay.
with that, I would entertain a motion for approval of all pending leases, contracts, agreements as listed on Exhibit 1, except for the World's Fuel Services.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Planzer seconds. We'll go for a roll call vote. Mr. Planzer?
Aye.
Ms. Topham?
Aye.
Mrs. Planzer?
Aye.
And Mr. Drake?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Thank you. Moving on, item number 4, we have item related to the formerly used defense sites FUD status. Look to a report from Manager Rafter, please.
I've been in contact with both our attorney as well as the Army Corps of Engineers. We were able to get through G.J. Smith, or from the Army Corps through G.J. Smith, actual delineation of the, what's called the MRS 2-acre site. So we now have latitude and longitude there. The discussion I had with the Army Corps today, based on our council advice, was if the Army Corps could give us something in writing stating essentially what they said, that there's no risk or whatever to the airport by allowing somebody to come in and do development on that adjacent site. Our council, I think, he had requested that we do something in that nature because he was concerned about other issues, the fact that it was just in the proximity of the 2-acre site. So I spoke to Heather from the Army Corps, and she said, she indicated she will be issuing a letter to us. And I don't have a time frame, but she said she will get that out to us. So that's the latest based on the information that we received from G.J. Smith's attorney, sent that to legal. They were still uncomfortable with it. And again, we trying to narrow down exactly where this MRS site is. So we have that, but council still has some concerns with that.
Any comments from the commission?
The Smith site is within that delineated state, right?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
I don't believe that it is. His question was that is the G.J. Smith site within the defined limits?
It doesn't appear to be, but again, council, even with that in mind, still had some concerns and wanted something from Army Corps, stating that there would be minimal to no risk for it.
Well, that's reasonable, but I'm just curious, was the other site from which the dirt was removed to airport property and where the ordinance was found and the contamination found, was that inside the 2-acre site or not?
It is, as it appears on drawing, yes.
Okay.
Or it
All right,
was.
thank you.
We removed it.
I'm willing to state some general concern that myself, as we're talking about this, that just because they map, I wonder about sort of the quality.
I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
Mr. Gasparo, if I may, I forgot one thing. When I did discuss this with the Army Corps, I asked, is there any way you can, be specific that the munitions will be within the 2-acre MRS site? And she indicated it is their best hope that it is because it was a munition dump and not, as she said, a bombing range. However, they couldn't be certain. And so I said, well, please give me whatever assurances you can in your letter, if we're looking to develop a parcel adjacent to that. I forgot that part. I apologize.
Mr. Chairman, if I may?
Yes.
What I was thinking is if this is outside the site, and we get the best assurance that we can from the Army Corps of Engineers that they believe there's nothing outside the 2 acres, is there a basis, and I think this is a subject that we should discuss, is there a basis for submitting to town council that if Mr. Smith is agreeable to the conditions that he's outlined in the past about taking responsibility for his site, I'd be interested at that point to know what council's objections are.
I guess my concern would be just thinking, wearing my surveyor's hat as well, how did they determine those coordinates that they've come up with? What is the quality of that map? And essentially, what's the basis of the information? How certain can we be that is in fact the correct area if it's going back 50 plus years? And what happens if they have to start chasing down outside of this area, they find something and they keep following it and it leads into this area? It seems to me that there's still a fair amount of risk involved by being an adjacent parcel in the general area. That's just how it seems to me.
I would suggest, if I may, Mr. Chairman, that we hold off. I think it's the right discussion, but why don't we hold off till we see what they send us? We don't know what the Army Corps is going to send. So it could be a moot point. They could say that it's minimal risk, and I think then your discussion is appropriate. But I don't know I don't have enough information now, so I wouldn't know what to state. Should we lease it or not lease it? I think the next step is to physically see what our friend Heather sends from the Army Corps of Engineers. And I don't see a decision pressing from G.J. Smith till we get that. Am I missing something?
No, I was just suggesting that perhaps we pursue a parallel track in the interest of time, if that's appropriate, to determine, in essence, what liability we have, given the history here, what liability we have if, regardless of who did the surveying and when it was done, the Army Corps of Engineers says these are the coordinates. We're not going to remediate. We're not going to do any surveying or remediation outside of that 2-acre site. And it's on your hook in any event. Because it seems to me that in the interest of their view of the taxpayers' money, that would be a reasonable position for them to take. So that was what I was suggesting. I'm not suggesting we jump ahead and say we're going to approve the lease. I'm just suggesting that we look at it from the standpoint of how can we make this process as efficient as possible.
Would it be a safe assumption, Dan, to reword that and say that we would want to look at what protections we would want in any agreement? If we were to start to explore that, what protections we would want?
Yeah, I think that's a fair, gives it some solid grounding. Yes.
Okay.
Wait, I don't think I follow here. What are we suggesting? I'm not following.
I think what Dan is saying, on a parallel track, have legal begin the process of, let's assume that the Army Corps comes back with whatever. It's still adjacent to it, so there's still some level of risk. What protections do we want in what's different language maybe in the agreement that says, hey, you're aware of this, what to minimize our risk or liabilities, knowing full well they're going into it that if something does migrate into that area or whatever, they're aware that right next door was a MRS and blah, 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 and all the other stuff.
That's essentially right, yes.
Okay, but why wouldn't we wait for the Corps of Engineers to tell us exactly? I mean, is there really that big of a time loop?
We
I don't
can't
see
do
it.
anything till we get that.
I think.
And if I'm the attorney,
I don't
I'm
think
gonna-
so, but I'm trying to play this out now. We're here in 2 more weeks. We have a letter. You now have further information to make your decision. You make a decision, and now we're going to have to go back and either cancel it or we move forward. And if we move forward, that's the way we're going to have. It just maybe.
But don't you
At a
think?
time.
Don't you think the attorney for town's going to say, "I'm not going to be able to tell you
Until
anything I see what they're saying"?
And he did say his last email is, "Let's wait and see what the letter says." So, yeah, you're right.
So would you like to table this? Is that what we should do? For a while?
That seems the most appropriate
Yes.
at this point. Dan?
That's fine. I was not aware of that last email.
I apologize. I just remembered he sent that late on another subject.
But I also know that I think at the end of the day, it's either going to be very obvious that we don't do it, or there are going to be a lot of questions that have to be answered before we can get to an agreement with Mr. Smith. And my guess is, I think it's an educated guess, is that's going to be the scenario. But if you want to wait, that's fine.
Okay.
I think it might be appropriate, though, to authorize Mr. Rafter to go ahead, once we hear from the Army Corps of Engineers, if it's tomorrow or the next day, to go ahead and, there's a reasonable comfort level to go ahead and start the exploratory process with town council rather than waiting 2 more weeks. I believe it's his judgment.
Yeah,
That's-
we can certainly progress it
But doesn't
accordingly.
he get to do that anyway? If he gets the response from the Army Corps of Engineers, doesn't he get to start to explore it? That he doesn't, I mean, I'll be glad to ratify your use of good judgment, but I kind of don't see
Yeah,
that as
in
the
the normal
point.
course of action.
No,
that's what I-
however you want to do it, I don't care. It's just that I would encourage him, with the knowing that he has the commission's blessing, to explore this if it appears to be the right answer, because it is a change of course for us. I mean, we've sort of been heading down the road of canceling the procurement.
But,
We haven't voted on it, but that's sort of the road we've been heading down.
well, but there's
And-
also been progress towards an agreement. There was up until a
Right.
point, so we'll just pick that up from there.
We'll just look
Okay.
for a report from Tom at the next meeting and go from there.
Fair enough.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Okay, thank you. Anything else on that matter? Hearing none, we'll move on to number 5, the pending matters. We are continuing sort of longstanding agenda item with respect to the Town of Nantucket MOU update. Tom, work in
No change there.
progress.
We're still waiting on town. Like I said, they've developed procedures, forms, but it hasn't been finalized yet.
Any commissioners have any comments on that?
No.
Hearing none, we'll move on to the Master Plan and Sustainability Program. The first, we have 2 sub-items. The first is an update and discussion of issues with the Master Plan consultant. They're not here. At the same time, I think this is a good chance for the commission to air any concerns or questions they may have with the progress, and we did receive an update, a report from Jacobs, the weekly report, and I guess we'll start with Tom if we could, and then we'll turn to the commission.
I've also been in touch with Jacobs a few times today. They've submitted updates on some of the numbers that they put out previously, clarified that, updated them, and
Which numbers, Tom?
it was essentially looking at the ferry versus the air traffic and the impact of the ferry on the air traffic. And they did assure me that because of the latest information with the ferry, that will be included in the forecast section as well as throughout the rest of the master plan when you look at various scenarios and potential impacts. So when it comes to financial feasibility and looking at alternative analysis, those types of things, various scenarios, that this latest information will be carried through the rest of the master plan.
Okay.
I'll say that in preparation for this, I reviewed sort of where we were at with the master plan, and one of the items that I know, as well as the weekly report that we got, and one of the items I noticed was with respect to the forecast activity, that that the report we've received is that that's done, and that we've received the FAA letter, and perhaps this is somewhat duplicative to what Tom just mentioned, but to me, with this new information, I think that needs really the section of the master plan related to forecasts needs to be reopened, reexamined.
It will be, but I don't know, according to what I've seen from Jacobs, it doesn't appear as though it will change much because there is a, if you will, worst-case scenario that indicates.
Well, excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I have had a series of email exchanges with Mr. Richardson of Jacobs. Mr. Raptor has been a party to those emails. And they started last week, just before our discussion at the special meeting, when he sent me their schedule, which showed employments and also the ferry loadings, if you will, for the steamship authority. And I had sent him the day before the steamship's numbers for 12/31/13 and 12/31/12. I pointed out to him that those numbers which I had sent to him bore no relation to the steamship authority numbers which were cited in his piece. that they were too high if they were the fast-varying numbers, and they were too low if they were the total numbers. To make a long story short, we've had several back and forths on these. Yesterday, he said he was still trying to figure out where the difference was. I said, well, the fact of the matter is the Steamship Authority has reported these numbers publicly, and that they're obviously the ones we need to go with. So his response back to me today was fine. I said, is this going to carry through into the financial projections? He did point out that their downside scenario was included something where, in fact, basically the air taxi business to Hyannis went away. I said, is this going to follow through into the financial forecasts? And his most recent response to me this afternoon was, well, it could. And I think, from my perspective, the purpose of part of this discussion is to be concerned with the fact that these numbers that they've been feeding us are off by a considerable amount, number one. And number two, to me, it goes without saying that the financial forecast should reflect the forecasts and the air service numbers. But I said it was really the Commission's decision, and I would take that up with you this afternoon.
I tend to agree. I think that we need to factor in this new information, and I'm not sure if you're aware, Dan, or the Commission, but that the Steamship Board approved today the request from the High Line. So we now have this new information that I think we would be remiss to not have very clearly considered in the master plan. Mr. Plansner?
Yeah, I think Jacobs is required to include that. When you do the master plan and you have a group of scenarios, the financial piece doesn't reflect the worst case. It reflects the median case in the numbers. So I think what we can do is allow Jacobs to do what we're contracted with them and then review the content of what they have to make sure that we're comfortable with what they have in the plan. And I think that's where we go. So I want to be careful. We're not telling them to do something with the numbers and the finances that don't fit their best practices. That's my concern. So I would think that Mr. Gasparo's point that it should be included, I did see where the ferry's been approved. I think that's perfectly a good thing to do. And Dan's point is we have to include that. Just don't give them their answers. Make sure that they perform their function as expert consultants, and then we review in a draft form what they give us, and then we can ask the right questions at that time. Just don't give them the answers, because then we own something that we cannot support. So I would just suggest that to you, Mr. Rafferty.
And that's the discussion I had, was just based on the most recent information, that be included throughout as a thread and taken into consideration.
Perfect.
Dan, you
I mean, I think what I was doing, Mr. Planzer, was trying to head them off and going in the wrong direction with their underlying numbers, which were incorrect. And I'm not, I don't have a whole lot of confidence in the Highline numbers now either. I don't know where they got those from. But if you're basing your whole plan on incorrect numbers, I think they need to be called on it before they go through the whole exercise and finish it up. Otherwise, it's a real waste of time and money. So that's why I did what I did.
And Bill is working on that, as I understand. He's going back to the raw data to double check it.
Thank you.
should we, as a commission, consider having the master plan consultant, inviting him to one of our future meetings to sort of go over these drafts, or should we, I'm just sort of throwing this out for the commission's discussion.
I think we should do it as a special workshop. And hopefully if we can do it before the next advisory committee meeting.
Well, that's, I think, May 29th.
I mean, there was another factual statement, incorrect statement, which he made in the material that he sent me, which was that the Hyannis emplanements accounted for only about 28% of the total emplanements at Nantucket Airport, which was, the inverse is true. And again, I don't know how far that has permeated the work they've done, but it needs to be set straight right away. It has been set straight. But, I've developed, frankly, a concern about a lot of the foundation of this based on the things Mr. Rafter has told me, some of your comments, Mr. Gasparo, and my own observations.
I'm just wondering, I agree, absolutely. I think that it may be helpful for them to hear that from us and for us to all perhaps have some of this information, give him a chance to refine, as he says that he's working on with Tom. In terms of a special meeting, I just sort of looked at the calendar quick. The work group is scheduled for May 29th, and I believe our next commission meeting is it
2 weeks from today?
27th.
the 27th. So it almost seems, do we just try to fit it in on the 27th at our regular meeting? Or when would we schedule a special? I mean, I'm fine with just doing it at a regular meeting.
Yes.
That sounds reasonable, Art.
That's fine.
Dan,
That's fine.
so should
That's
we?
fine. I think you can be a little more relaxed and get into it in a workshop setting than you can in a regular meeting, but if that's what you all want, that's fine.
Do we want to start that or have that like at 4 o'clock before our regular meeting? Does that work or not?
That would work.
That's fine with me.
Do you think it's enough time?
I think so. I mean, I think based on the frequency of our meetings at this point and the length of our agenda, and as long as we don't add a executive session or something for that night, that I can't see that we're going to run out of time myself. And if that's the consensus of the commission, then we could have the manager invite Jacobs for 4 o'clock on the 27th.
It is upsetting that the figures are not jiving, and so that's something that I'd like to really get solved or resolved.
I think the timing is good for sort of just ahead of the advisory work group. And
Well, my concern about that is that if we decide something needs a significant change in course, they won't have really any time to do it.
well, another option would be to have a meeting in 1 week on the 20th, and then so that the commission is now then going to have met, 3 weeks in a row. Seems a little overkill to me, but I'll go with the consensus of the commission. Anyone?
I think I'd
I
like it
agree.
just like
27th?
the
27th,
27th,
I like
same day.
Ms. Toplam's
Yeah, idea.
Does that work for you, Dan?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll plan on posting that meeting for the starting at 4 on the 27th, and we'll put that as the initial agenda item and invite Jacobs if we could, please.
Yep.
Thank you. And then, just staying on the topic, I think that A and B as sub-items sort of both morphed together, but does anyone have any other questions, comments
Just
on yes, Mr.
One other
Rafter.
thing, as an update on the master plan, we're proceeding with the alternatives analysis, and I met with Jacobs and Andrew Vorse from Plus the other day, and Commissioner Planzer, Andrew Planzer?
Yeah.
Correct that. And we are meeting also this Thursday with Mary Walsh of the FAA. Essentially, we went through some of the alternative analysis to get a sense from the group if there's any showstoppers or anything we should not be presenting to the advisory committee. And that's what we're going to be doing with the FAA as well, to make sure we're all still on the same page and that they're clued into it early on. So that's where we are with the alternative analysis.
Are you going to talk about the worst case scenario with Mary Walsh?
We can.
I know. I was just asking, were you planning to? I'm not suggesting you should.
Again, we're still looking at alternatives, so whether or not we need to expand the terminal based on the worst-case scenario, I don't think they're going to be too concerned with it. But
unfortunately, this is part of the problem. The terminal needs that are coming out in the master plan are essentially unrelated to the air taxi business. Is that not correct?
they're primarily related to the seasonal in terms of the terminal needs.
They're related to seasonal and the secure traveler rather than the unsecured traveler.
Right, which is the current
Which
deficiency
makes it a lot harder to explain to people why you want to make changes if your business is going away.
But that business is not.
And therefore, I wonder if it isn't worth, taking a few minutes with her to tell her what's going on.
I guess I'm a little puzzled, Dan. If the air taxis go away, that's not what we're focusing on in the terminal. That's already there.
That's what I'm saying, Tom. What I'm saying is that we say a lot, a good portion of our business may go away fairly soon, and yet we want to rearrange the terminal. And what we have to make sure is that both they and ultimately the citizens of Nantucket understand that essentially these are two different issues. Because they're apples and oranges.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, in other words, why would we want to be expanding if there were an impact, if some level of traffic may be going down?
There's two different parts of the terminal. You can see it when you walk in. There's the secured area, which is for seasonal travelers and the year-round Cape Air flights that require them to have it going to Boston primarily. That part of the terminal is where your congestion comes around the TSA. It involves the use of all the summer traffic and the flow of traffic. That's increasing. We're getting more summer traffic, and we're getting larger aircraft in. So the expansion and changes of the terminal, from what I saw, Mr. Rafter, had to focus on how we better flow that traffic in the summertime. There is also a separate piece of unsecured travel, which seems to be not much of a problem, whether it grows, stays, or declines. So I don't want to confuse the contractor or the FAA as to the value of terminal corrections, not necessarily expansions. We're not adding another building. We're altering the structure of the current building to allow TSA to better handle that summer traffic problem. So I don't know what you want. I'm not going to be there. You talk with Ms. Walsh on the things you need to, but let's not put ourselves in a hole on what we have to redo, because we're going to ask for money to do that, versus what we already have as an issue in the master plan on the volume of commuter traffic.
Correct.
Mr. Rafter?
I agree 100%. I don't want to confuse anybody, but I don't want them to be confused because we don't explain it to them either. And I've already gotten some questions about why are you rebuilding the tower? Which is the same, in a sense, the same sort of question. So I think, again, it's better to be upfront with these people.
Well, we're going to be
happening. To wait until they stumble into it.
I think we are going to be upfront with them. Two different things. I don't understand what the tower issue is. The volume of traffic is not significantly altered. The tower is a requirement to replace. It is outdated. It's got problems. It's got asbestos. We all understand that. I don't know where those questions. It's unrelated. The tower reconstruction is unrelated to the current projections of the commuter traffic. If it wasn't
that's my point precisely, but people don't understand it that way.
Well, we need to explain it perhaps better, because the tower.
That's again my
I think
point.
that's what he said starting the conversation, was just to be sure that we explain that to Ms. Walsh
But she is FAA. She knows.
Yeah.
She's not sitting there saying we're going to take away the tower. The
No,
tower.
No. Come on, I'm not suggesting.
What I'm hearing, if I may, is just being clear, really, with her, the needs of the terminal and the changes with respect to year-round and seasonal service. And just being sure that we give her the local flavor, if you will, while she may have a 30,000-foot view of everything that's going on, what we might need
I
and
will
what's
certainly
happening
provide her
here.
with updated information that we have on what may impact our traffic. But I also don't want to say that the sky is falling just yet, and we're going to be addressing existing deficiencies as we have been. The master plan clearly lays out where the traffic is growing and looks at alternatives where it may not be. So we can certainly make her aware of local issues, which she is very much aware of, believe it or not, because she has a residence nearby, too. So, but we'll make sure she's aware of it.
Yeah, and just so nobody misunderstands, the only reason, and I did this for many years, the only reason there's a tower here that is a federal tower versus a contract tower is summer traffic.
Mm-hmm.
Summer traffic drives the requirement for that control tower. And she, Ms. Walsh, is very smart, very well-intended, and very capable. Be open with her, but she'll read that. She understands that. She's not going to have any confusion about it that I can imagine. And I think, Tom, I trust that you can be very upfront with her.
Okay. We'll leave that to Tom.
All right.
There was two more items in our packet with respect to this one agenda item, and I felt that our special meeting, there was a lot of the talk and concerns related to overall transportation planning and town of Nantucket issues. And so I just did do a little bit of research online, and I don't think we need to get into a big discussion about it, but the town does have a transportation planner. It does have a transportation plan. So I had just provided that so that any commissioners that are interested could have a look at it. I don't know exactly how we, at this point, incorporate that, but it's something I think to be thinking about. There are additional funds, how that may somehow get tied in to help the airport. I don't know, but it's out there.
A question
Go ahead,
on
Tom.
that. Is the town or county also the local MPO, or are they part of another MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization?
Yeah, no, what we have here on Nantucket is that the Nantucket Planning and Economic Development Commission is that entity, the county and town being one, and then the entity. So we are the only district that it covers a single town.
Okay.
So yes,
they're the ones that
everything
would
is
create the tip,
funneled.
and then we communicate.
That's correct.
I haven't seen that. If something was sent out to the commission.
It wasn't. It was to. I didn't want to send to the whole commission to not violate open meeting, but I had sent it to yourself, Tom, and Janine on May 8th. And there's nothing more than I stated as a follow-up to our recent meeting. Perhaps this program could benefit the airport, and I just provided a link. It probably would have been safe to everybody, but having just heard counsel the meeting before, I was overly conservative. And so it is in the packet, but perhaps if it goes to the whole commission, then you can just click on the link instead of typing it in. And again, I took it right from the town webpage, though it did take a little digging. The second item, which is probably a moot point at this now, given today's vote, but I think it's worthy of mentioning, the letter from the manager of the Barnstable Airport following up with to the Steamship Authority with similar concerns, as well as I think that's really about it. Looks like I think that's it. I don't know if anybody else wants to add anything on that topic. Hearing not, I think we'll move on. And we also, thank you, Dan, we have in our packet that what you had forwarded on to Mr. Wallenberg, and I think that was a great idea, and sort of being sure that the state knows some of these things that they probably otherwise wouldn't have had that information. Okay.
I guess.
Go ahead, Dan.
I'm sorry, I did just find this notice. I see they're all either road or basically bike path or NERDA projects that they're considering. And I think, I'm not sure who would play an overarching role in coordinating this. And clearly, it's not just the town of Nantucket, but it's also the town of Barnstable, and the state has an interest, as evidenced by what Mr. Willenborg said. So I think we need to keep in mind that it's not just a town issue, although it's very important to the town, in my view.
I think one thing we can all keep in mind is, as we go through this, is perhaps if there's some idea or a project that may make an improvement, it might be something that we could then apply for. I don't have any ideas at this point, but at least I just want to make everyone aware that it's out there. I suspect that nobody has asked or made a suggestion, and this is all simply being driven by the transportation planner, primarily focused on road and bike path infrastructure. But perhaps if these funds are applicable, we then may be able to consider it as it may relate, whether it's intermodal or whatnot. Okay. And I think that covers that topic, unless anyone else has anything further. Moving on, the next agenda item, number 7, we have consideration of a new administrative position. Mr. Rafter, would you like to give us a briefing on that?
I would like to request permission from the commission to establish a new position, administrative assistant, to assist our office manager with a number of the leases and RFPs and contracts and various office-type work that we desperately need. We have a number of items in the queue that are backed up, and we just have a lot of work managing the existing leases, making sure they're up to date, making sure all the things are in place that need to be. And I'd like to request permission to add that to the budget. We do have some money in the budget. We may have to transfer some money from operating, but we're looking at probably a salary range somewhere in the $50,000 range.
For the benefit of the people who are new on the commission, you might explain what you mean by transferring from operating.
Okay.
I don't think they necessarily understand the distinction between the personnel and operating
There's a division between salary and wages and the operating, and once you create the budget, that's where the money goes. There are two, as I understand it, two means of being able to transfer money, and one is either at special town meeting or annual town meeting, the other being at the end of the fiscal year. With the approval of FinCom and Board of Selectmen, you can transfer money in from operating into salary and wage, or I believe vice versa, to essentially reconcile. And that's another thing that we'll be working on at the end of the year here with the Finance Department downtown. But for purposes of this would be for this year as well as next year.
Okay. Is this something that you're looking for a vote or just consent?
I just consent. I think you have to approve it.
I think we need a vote to create a new position.
Do we want to, at this point, just ask Tom to give him consent to move forward to formulate job description, or actually go ahead and actually approve the position at this point? I guess would be the discussion for the commission. Anyone?
I'm not on that, but is this a 40-hour a
Yes,
week
this would be a
job?
full-time job.
Did I just heard you say for 2 years, or did I misunderstand?
No,
There was something about 2
I
years.
would like to do it as soon as possible, so
Right.
there would be a portion of it in the existing fiscal year,
Okay.
maybe a month or so.
Any other commissioners?
I think it's up to Tom to tell us whether he wants to do it once the position is approved now, or wants to hold off on that.
I'd like to get it approved as soon as possible. I have a draft job description I can circulate first thing tomorrow morning. I need to just refine it a little bit, but the workload is very heavy on somebody's shoulders here. And we're backing up, and we're missing things. We need to get some things wrapped up and make sure that we're processing things quickly.
I'm supportive of the recommendation and
I
open
am
up that
also.
if anybody
Yeah.
wants to make a motion.
Sure, I'll make a motion that we give Tom, the manager of the airport, the authority to hire the new position as described.
And
Second.
Is there a second? Any discussion on the motion?
Just a comment, Mr. Chairman. I fully support this. I think that in watching the office from fairly close up, it's not that they aren't trying their damnedest to get all this stuff done. There's just too much. And the risk is the system will break down entirely if we don't do this.
I feel the same way, having
think we all do.
observed that as well. Sort of, I almost see it as just as the manager probably recommending it, just good practice, good business practice. And so with that, I'll entertain a roll call on the motion as it stands.
I had a question,
Go ahead, Ms.
please.
Topham.
I'm sorry. We just have this non-union positions to the town of Nantucket. Is that going to be something you're going to consider in your requirements for the job description?
Yes, and I'll get into that in a bit. but
Okay.
That's essentially putting a structure around all of the salary bands
Right.
within the town.
Okay.
So that's the type of tool that will make it easier when we go for a new position. We say, this is where they're going to fit.
Okay,
You base it on the criteria as opposed to just picking it out of the sky.
okay.
So,
Thank you.
Do we need to be a little careful, though? Excuse me. Do we need to be a little careful about assuming that this is a non-union position?
I don't know that it would be non-union.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
So with that, we'll go for a roll call vote, please. Mr. Planzer?
Aye.
Ms. Topham?
Aye.
Mrs. Planzer?
Aye.
Mr. Drake?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. With that, we'll move on to the manager's report, please.
I've got quite a few items for you today. I should be quick, though. On the project side of the house, the reels and pappies for runway 1533 should be complete this week. FAA has been moving quickly with that. The runway 6 VASI has, on the Pappy project, the VASI has been removed. That's why the runway was shut down yesterday. So you may have seen some planes flying over the town, taking off on the other runway.
I was in one of them yesterday.
I noticed and asked about it today.
I was wondering if we were going to make it off the ground before we got down to the end of the runway.
The passenger facility charge, I spoke with Priscilla Scott of the FAA yesterday, and she indicated that we are next in line, and we should have a decision by the end of this week. So I'm going to keep my fingers crossed on that. On the the rescue vehicle.
Excuse me.
Go ahead.
Question. Tom, what's the notification procedure if we get that approved?
It's if we get approval, assuming next week, the collections would begin the first full month after that. So
I understand that, but my question is, what is the notification process to the airline world?
The FAA will come out with a decision, and I believe we notify the airlines and give them notice of when they have to begin the collection. So our consultant would handle that.
Okay, thank you.
If I could just follow up on that, I'd like to see us be as prepared as possible. I'm sure that you are, but
Yeah.
we're waiting on that word, and so if we could have
I'll get the
whatever
consultant
drafted in
geared up, ready to
advance
go.
and
Yeah.
ready to fly, if you will.
Or more importantly, that the consultant's ready to move.
Well, and I may be wrong. It might even be an FAA notification, but I'll make sure either way we're ready to go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The two projects that we put grant applications in for, we're hearing back that we've received an FAA grant, or there's supposed to be an announcement coming out shortly, for the aircraft rescue and firefighting vehicle and the security project. We received bids on both of those projects. Both came within budget. The apparent low bidder for the ARF vehicle was Oshkosh, and the apparent low bidder for the security project was Cobo. Congressman Keating will be on island Friday morning at 9 o'clock and making an announcement with regard to those grants. On the RFQ, RFP update.
Excuse me again, sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
But, Mr. Rafter, in terms of the ARF truck equipment that was not covered by the FAA grant, did we have to take out of the grant proposal?
It was taken out, and we are going to be putting together a separate bid specification for that.
But what about, we will not get any reimbursement for that, right?
We will get some, and what I'm looking at, Dan, is what the total would be, what our total cost would be, and hopefully we will see enough savings from the grants that we'll receive from the state and the other equipment to offset that, so that there's no net change to the, no negative net change to the debt service.
Okay. I mean, is there a possibility of getting another grant request into the state for the difference?
There may be. I can check on that.
It might be worth a phone call.
Yeah. On the control tower, as you know, you may know, Jacobs was selected, and it's somewhat of a different Jacobs, but it's the parent company from Jacobs that we have for our on-call. They were selected to perform the work. We had a pre-planned meeting with them, and there's a design charrette going to be held here June 11th through and 12th to go over the details and particulars on that. I will say that one of the things we did find from there is that the construction most likely will be going into the summer of next year, so we will probably have a temporary tower through the summer of next year. So we'll have to plan.
Through the summer, you think?
Through most of the summer, yes, unfortunately.
And the reason for that was, please? Or is?
Just the timing on being able to put all this together and phase in the construction and the approval process and permitting and things of that nature.
Thank you.
We discussed the fuel contracts earlier. The master terminal agreements, we just recently got them back from legal counsel, and they're going out to the airlines, so you'll have them available at the next meeting. On the operational side, seasonal employees are coming on board, going through training, so that process is moving along well. We had a tremendous project, not yet completed. They're coming back next week to finish it, but the Massachusetts Department of Transportation Aeronautics Division contracted out crack sealing and painting of runways. So they did, and I believe it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 6,000 gallons of crack sealing on our airport, and they're coming back to paint the runways. That is a tremendous benefit to the airport. It's very costly and saves us quite a deal. So it's a tremendous program, and I can't thank MassDOT enough for that.
On those lines, is that something we should send a letter to an individual?
I will definitely send something to Chris Will.
Appreciation. Thank you.
Just a note, JetBlue begins this week on the 15th. We have a special event May 16th in association with Wine Festival in Hangar Number 4. We've met with them, worked out the logistics. They're still waiting their final permit from the town, but we're ready to go with that. You may remember I mentioned that we had a request for a Miami Air charter Boeing 737, May 23rd through the 26th, and we've worked out the logistics with that with regard to handling and security, so that's a go. And we're now continuing to work on the logistics for an MD-83 charter request for June 26th through the 29th.
Does the plane stay here all that time? It doesn't, does it?
It does, unfortunately, but if we get pushed, we may have them ferry it out. But right now, we're trying to work it. If we can see if we can keep it on the ground. If we don't think we're going to have enough space, we'll tell them they'll have to ferry out and ferry back in.
After they fuel.
Yes. Unfortunately, not going that far. The hangar number 7, former Taylor hangar, now the Marine hangar, work is continuing. They're working on the new door. They've cleaned up most of the inside, so things are progressing pretty well there. I had a handout that Commissioner Topham referred to earlier, the proposed classification plan grade level characteristic chart. This is a work in progress that the town is doing their compensation study on. And again, it's essentially establishing salary bands and then the criteria for each band. So it's organizing the town-wide employees, and some of the questions for the commissioners, the question was asked of me, do we want to be included on the, and this, the sample that you have there is just non-union. They will be doing it for union, I believe, if it's in their scope. They're doing it for the other town unions. They wanted to know if the airport wanted to be included as part of the overall town non-union or separate. And also, they asked if we would like for the consultant to give a separate briefing to the Airport Commission or do a joint meeting, which is scheduled to be held June 11th with Board of Selectmen as a workshop. I believe they may also be inviting the union into the June 11th BOS workshop. So we may want to review this and get a separate update from the consultant, and I can check into that. That may be the way to go. I'm not sure if we would get a lot accomplished at a joint one. There's some benefits to that, but at the same time, I think we need, I just received this today and haven't had a chance to go through it, and I need to look at the other metrics that they're using. It's a weighted matrix, essentially, and where they're putting different positions and make sure that they're falling in the right categories. The challenge I have in lumping us in with the town employees is that, and the argument can be made in various departments, but I think there's various technical, highly technical skills involved at the airport that some of our folks do that I don't know that you could compare to any other similar position in town. For example, our operations personnel are cross-utilized and cross-trained as firefighters, operations personnel, as well as refuelers. That is putting three very technical skills together there. So there may be some benefit to having us separate but in the same type of structure. So I just, the two questions, like I say, are, does the commission want to have a separate briefing, or do you want to join in on a joint BOS workshop?
I won't be here on June 11th.
I think we should have a separate one, frankly, because I think questions like this can be raised. The one you just talked about, for example, although I think the town should take into consideration too, if you are combining two sets of skills or three sets of skills, does that automatically, under this kind of metric, does it move somebody up into a higher level? Those are questions which the town needs to answer too, because I think they do have some people get into that kind of role. And so I think from our standpoint, ultimately, we should probably adopt it as a guideline, not as firm policy. Would be sort of where I would think we'd want to go with it. But let's wait and see. And I would like to have the meeting separate.
I think the reason I would recommend a separate briefing is because I believe the town manager and some others already have some more detail on this. There's further information regarding the weighted matrix and how they're going about it, and the span, if you will, that they're giving in the latitude. So it may be very beneficial to have the consultant come in and give a briefing to the commission so that you can then make further decisions.
Is that something that we maybe would want to consider for earlier on the same day? Or I mean, I'll leave it to you, Tom. I don't think it's something we're going to settle right now, but it's just a thought.
It could be because of the availability of the consultant coming to and from the island. So. Oh, that's the day of our charrette with Jacobs, too, as well as the capital planning committee.
Okay, well, we'll leave it to you. I feel as well that I would like to have it be second. Is that sort of, it seems to be the consensus of the commission.
Definitely.
We'll work to schedule that.
Thank you.
And again, I don't know that there's any specific tie in terms of timing, having it before or after the BOS. So, Just another reminder on the operations side, our FAA certification inspection for Part 139 takes place June 3rd through the 5th, so there's a lot of activity in maintenance and operations getting ready for that. David is doing an internal pre-inspection, if you will, going through and making sure everything's the way it's supposed to be. And so there's a lot of effort being put into that. As you know, it's a very tedious inspection, and can't wait for it to get completed.
Well, we
And
got a
one-
good report last year,
I
didn't we,
mean,
relatively? Or no?
May I ask a question which I think many may consider heresy, but I would like to ask it anyway?
The floor is yours.
What are the relative advantages and disadvantages of being, and you don't have to answer this now, but I think it's something we probably should talk about, or maybe not, of being a Part 139 airport?
The advantage is we can take in the scheduled carriers that come in the season. We're required to have it.
You're required to have it for any scheduled carrier?
Yes.
Over 10 seats, I believe it is, or
Absolutely.
Over 9, right?
over
Yeah.
9 seats.
Over 9 seats.
Absolutely required.
Yeah.
We could not exist if we weren't.
Yeah, we
certified.
we're-
Okay, that's fair. That answers my question. Thank you.
Okay. One other note, just an update on staff. Jamie Miller has begun as business finance manager, and she's been working closely with Ashley. Ashley's come in a few hours each morning now, and I think we're going through a decent transition process, and look forward to working with Jamie. So, good news there. And that's the end of my report.
Did anybody have any questions for Tom based upon his report? Thank you, Tom. Next item on the agenda were the subcommittee reports. We did have an energy and environmental subcommittee with Mr. Planzer, myself, Mr. Carberg, and Mr. Rafter. I think that perhaps at a future meeting, when we have the minutes, we could review them collectively. I'll give a brief synopsis and then turn it over to my colleagues should they wish to add anything. But we really brought our newest subcommittee member up to speed with respect to sort of some of the past issues. We went over some of the mowing and things related to our obligations as they relate to permits that we hold related to really environmental matters. We had some discussions about noise in general, and I think that was probably the gist of it, and we could, again, get the minutes to the entire commission and discuss it further then if anyone had any other questions. We didn't have any action items that came out of the particular subcommittee meeting, and I'll open it up if anybody wanted to add anything.
I just wanted to thank you, Art, Tom. No, I thought it was a very, very well done meeting, and I appreciated the time and effort to both bring me up to speed and allow me to understand the issues, and I appreciated it. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, Mr. Carberg, to no surprise, had put the materials together for us and was very helpful and was very well prepared. I don't believe we had any other subcommittees or reports. With that, we'll move on to commissioner comments. Anything from any commissioners?
Well,
Mrs.
I was
Topham?
thinking after our last meeting with the Highline and Steamship Authority, and there was comments since I've heard from people about maybe we should talk to the airlines because they say, why are they so expensive? And so that was also brought up at that meeting. So maybe last year we had some meetings, didn't we, Mr. Rafter, with some of the people that were at the airport, but not necessarily the airlines.
Yeah, it's difficult because they'll come back again with the passenger facility charge, too.
Well,
But there are different reasons for how the rates are established by each airline, depending upon where they're flying, what type of equipment, all those types of things. So we are looking at that issue in the context of overall our rates and charges. How do we streamline them? How do we make them, better? As I say, another piece of the master plan that's coming out, and it's in its second draft, but it's still not there yet, is the financial benchmarking. And one of the metrics, or the big metric that is used there, is what is the cost per in-plane passenger to the airline? How much do they pay to the airport, and how do we compare? Right now, we're still relatively low. An ironic piece of information there is that of the top 200 airports in the country in terms of fares, Nantucket is the second from the bottom. We're the second lowest fares. However, the reason for that is because it's a very short-haul market. And on the other end of the spectrum, though, our yields, which is the profit per seat to the airline, is the highest in those 200. So it's a dynamic.
Is that an amalgamation of all flights?
Yes. So that's what this financial benchmarking and analysis was looking at, saying it looks at each piece that where we generate revenue, whether it be from airlines or non-aeronautical charges, and it gives a sense of, is there room for increase or movement, or is it too high or too low? So we can, our charges, I would say, have very little influence on the actual fee that is charged by the airline. Typically, that's the case in airports throughout the country, where a small percentage of what the actual ticket cost is. Their costs are generated primarily from overhead, fuel, staffing, operating costs, equipment costs, maintenance, those types of things. And it's somewhat difficult to fly an airplane a very short distance and make it profitable. So we can look into that. We can talk to them. They're going to establish their prices the way they need to.
It seems like they should be the one that's giving out this information then, rather than us.
They're going to have to adjust to, market changes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's part of technology growth and everything else. So.
Yeah, but I think there are a couple of basic things that we have to recognize. I'm not disagreeing with anything that's been said. One is that $14 of every ticket to Hyannis is taxes, and that will go up to $18.50 when we have the PFC. Whereas 50 cents of every steamship ticket is taxes. So that's one major difference right there. The other is that if you think about it, the economics of running a 9-passenger airplane with a pilot plus all the ground support, and the economics of running a 300 to 430 passenger ferry with the same number of crew, I believe, on the larger one as on the smaller one. The economic model is totally different. So, yeah, you can look at them, but you're going to have to really dig in, and otherwise you're talking about apples and oranges.
Mm-hmm.
Any other
And again,
commissioner?
it's also interesting. Excuse me, as was pointed out last week, that the steamship is willing to basically let the High Line have all the fast ferry business, or most of it, because it doesn't involve any capital outlay from them, and they do get some revenue from it. So it's very complicated, and I don't pretend to understand it all, but it's not just an easy fix.
Agreed. Anybody else? Dan, did you have any additional comments?
No, thank you.
I would just add that I learned quite a bit at that last meeting and wasn't aware of the license fee that went from the High Line to the steamship, and found that to be a particularly interesting piece of information. The only thing I also would add is with respect to Mr. Keating's visit, I will not be able to attend that. I don't know if there are any other commissioners, but so that everyone
I'll be
is
there.
aware. Great.
I may be there.
Well, my
I think
problem,
that'd be good. Two commissioners could be there. It'd be great.
my problem in attending,
Unfortunately, won't be back.
my problem in attending is I can't get a seat on a flight from Boston. Every single flight, every seat is sold
Goodness,
out.
we like to hear that.
That's a whole other issue. I had the same problem. But when I went on to look, there were a few flights available before noon. But on the Cape Air website, it said that the refundable fare was sold out, and the non-refundable fare was $200.
There is a what the market will bear in their pricing.
So we're
Exactly.
expecting a good weekend for,
And they obviously sold them all at 200.
Wow.
that's that yield.
Okay.
By the way, Island Air was sold out from Hyannis here. Because I thought about driving to Hyannis and flying from there.
Okay, with that, is there any public comment? Hearing none, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Bobby has nothing to say?
He doesn't, he just
He just shook his head.
sort of wanted to. So am I.
I'll make the motion that we adjourn.
I'll second.
Roll call, Mr. Planzer,
Aye.
Mrs. Topham,
Aye.
Mrs. Topham, Mrs. Planzer, excuse me,
Topham.
sorry. It's not just you, Dan. It's not easy. And the chair votes aye. Thank you very
I'm
much.
glad somebody else has the same problem.
Yes. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to hang up on you. Good night, Dan.
Night.
Here's your packet back. You know what? I was at the building twice today, but you saw how it was great. And I did the warrant, but I mean, I had the kid at work.
And I usually check